Now, Erica's asked me to come on and talk about some common CV mistakes that we often find within graduate CVs when they're applying to these kinds of roles. But I'll give you a bit more of a broader scope as well, based on different kinds of positions you might be applying for, and how to kind of amend and tailor your CV in those situations. So these are the main kind of points I'm going to go through in today's PowerPoint. The first being to remember the essentials of writing a CV. Now I'll go into those slightly later on in terms of what those essentials are, but simple things like spelling and grammar, and not using any false information and things on your CV. The second of which is the first impression of the actual document itself. So how it looks and how it's designed, whether it's too long, too short, all that kind of thing. Third point is to tailor your CV. So make sure that you're changing it for each individual job that you're applying for. No job is going to be the same. So it's very important that your CV doesn't mirror that as well. The fourth point is the format and layout. So in terms of where you're going to structure the various different components of your CV. So whether that's your work experience or your education or your achievements, and how to set that all up. And then finally, this is probably the most important part we'll go over, is trying to use your skills and achievements over just the duties of what you've done in your past experience. But we'll get straight into that now. So first of which was the essentials. Now, as I've already mentioned, spelling and grammar is obviously a critical part of writing a very good CV. If your hiring manager is going to be able to pick out spelling mistakes straight away, then it's not going to look very well on yourself as an applicant. Now, myself, I'm actually dyslexic, so I've often struggled with spelling and grammar, and I actually use a tool called Grammarly. I'm sure you've seen it advertised, or whether that's been at uni or YouTube adverts, various different things. Grammarly is a great tool for me. I'm sure there's other spelling and grammar tools out there as well, just to make sure that you've got everything in order, so you're not making any little mistakes within the very first part of your CV. The second essential is to try not to use sort of cliche and generic terms. So, every single CV I read will say they're a good communicator or they're very confident. And then as soon as I get you on a video call or a phone call, it's very clear to me that maybe that person isn't as confident as they originally said, or can't communicate as well as they said. So those kind of generic terms, they're often, they fill space in your CV that's not needed. You can try and show your communication skills and confidence skills by relating them to actual real life situations you've been through. So you can do that at a later point of your CV. The third essential that you've got to remember, which I think I've already mentioned, is not to use any false information or lie on your CV. So, don't lie about your uni grades, don't lie about your school grades, don't lie about places you've been on work experience, because it will get found out. As a hiring manager myself, we'll always ask for references when we're taking somebody past the final stage interview, and those references are then asked whether various things on their CV are correct or not, and if they're not, then it's not going to look very well. And finally, references. Do not include full references on your CV. There'll be a little space at the bottom where you can put references available upon request. That's of course fine, but again, you don't need massive chunks of great references you've had. You can save those for when the hiring manager actually asks. So we're moving on to number two, first impressions. So I've broken this down into the design of your CV and also the length of it as well. So again, this is where you have to take into consideration who you're applying for. So you want to try and be as creative as possible where you can. So it might be that you can almost make a CV that's got loads of color and pictures and things on it, for, let's say you were going for some kind of marketing role or social media role, that might be acceptable. Whereas if you are applying to some kind of law firm, you'd have a much more formal looking CV. But there's different ways you can still try to be creative, whether that's dashes of color in headers and borders, or even just the way that you actually structure the CV itself. I would actually recommend using CV templates. templates. So, you know, if you go onto Google and simply type in CV templates, there'll be all kinds of sort of fill in the blank templates you can use, and they just make it look a lot better for that first impression. You know, there's nothing worse than looking at a dull, boring CV straight away, as opposed to something that really catches your eye. And now a real common mistake actually that I see in many CVs at the moment is the actual length of the CV itself. Now, I don't know whether it's sort of universally understood or not, but a CV should probably be no more than 2 pages long. You know, if you've got experience that fills 4 or 5 pages, great, but the chances are that experience isn't actually going to be all relevant for the job that you're applying for. So then it's up to you to condense all of that experience down, and education and achievements, whatever it is, and choose what's relevant for the actual position that you're applying for. I think that that's going to bode well, and of course, if you can keep it as concise as possible, it's going to make the reading a lot easier for the hiring manager. So I think we've got a couple of examples here. As you can see in these first 2 examples, these are unfortunately not graduate examples I've had myself. I was told for data protection reasons I couldn't actually put any graduate CVs on there myself, but this gives you a good understanding of, you know, the kind of design and structure that you might be looking to emulate. You don't have to add a picture, but you can feel free to add a headshot on there. That's not going to work against you. You know, bits of color, just the way that they've structured everything with, you know, headers and the lineage and stuff on there. It all looks fairly good. And then moving on to some poor examples. It's very bare and very blank. You know, if I open up a CV and it looks like this, the chances are I'm just not going to read it. And you might be perfect for the job as well. So do not shoot yourself in the foot by just providing a very plain, basic black and white CV. So moving on to the third point, and that's to tailor each CV to the job at hand. Now, we've discussed this slightly already, and I think this is probably one of the most important points, in the sense of if you have sent that CV off to 4, 5, 6 different companies, and they range from an executive search company like Mackenzie Stuart all the way over to a creative design company, the chances are that CV is not going to be able to pass sort of first stages of either of those companies, or it might be more suited to one, in which case you'd be successful with the creative design company, but that kind of CV is probably not going to cut it for Mackenzie Stuart or for an executive corporate kind of business. So it's very important to determine the kind of culture of the company you're actually applying to. You know, if it's a formal workplace, then you would have a more professional CV. You might not include that headshot. There might not be loads of color, but it would still be eye-catching. A less formal workplace, that's where you can be a little bit more creative. So in this sense, I would recommend to try and think outside the box as much as you can. You know, ultimately, your CV and your personal statement is there to catch the hiring manager's eye. So you don't want your profile to be forgotten. So if you can be creative, really do express that in as creative way as possible. And then I think it's really important as well to prioritize that experience and really choose what's relevant to the job that you're doing as well. So again, tailor that CV, not just based on design, but also on the content itself. So, you know, if you have work experience in some sales-based roles and you've also got some hospitality-based experience and you're applying to a sales-based job, then, you know, you don't need the hospitality bit in there if you've got good enough work experience in sales. Where it might be that you don't actually have any sales experience, you just have hospitality experience. But if you're applying to a sales role, you can still leave that hospitality experience in there, but then you can start to tailor the wording of the skills that you've developed and the achievements you've had within that position by trying to link it to a sales role. So you'd probably be talking about communication, you know, how hospitality has build up your ability to speak with people from all different kinds of backgrounds, and that's why it would relate to sales. So really do try to tailor the content as well as the design for each different job that you're applying for. This is just a couple of really good creative examples that I've seen. Now, the second one is a bit of a joke, obviously. I'm not expecting anybody to put their CV on a billboard, nor would that probably get you the job. But this example here that with the Gymshark, well, it's not just a CV on its own, but it's almost an application pack. The girl that did this, and I saw this on LinkedIn, she did end up actually getting an internship with Gymshark. So it does show you how that creative side for a lot of companies, a lot of those forward-thinking newer companies, does definitely work. It obviously helped Lee get the job that she was after. So that USB stick will have probably had her actual CV on there. I think the booklet was a bit of a portfolio of some of the fashion stuff that she had done. But you know, they're just a few ideas of how to think outside the box and get creative where you can. The fourth point is format and layout. So again, this probably features a little bit in terms of the first impressions and how you actually structure and design your CV. But as you can see on the right, there's a little example here of the template I made when we did an initiative with Leeds Rhinos Academy. Now, the Leeds Rhinos Academy boys, they hadn't really done any kind of skill sessions before. Some of them hadn't even written a CV before. And this might look new to you as well, which is completely fine. And do feel free to try and use a similar structure. Now, this is obviously lacking the color and things like that. But in terms of how you should really structure the CV with your personal details and then a small personal statement and then work experience, education, achievements, interests, that is how I would recommend you set it up. I think a poor layout will really affect the kind of overall aesthetics of your CV. If you have things all over the place, or you have, let's say, your achievements first or your interests first before your relevant work experience and education, it's just not going to read very well as a CV, which again is something that you drastically want to avoid. Notice as well that the use of the italics and the bold, that might seem like a very obvious and easy thing to highlight, but you'd be surprised the amount of people that will write their CV just without any bolding or italics, without changing the font, and again it's just very boring, difficult to read document. I'm actually not a fan of the underlining tool. You know, some hiring managers will be different, but you know, I guess that's irrelevant to the finishing the format and the layout for the CV itself. But you know, mess around with it and try and find a format that works for you and that looks good on the eye and reads well. Moving on to the final kind of point of all of this to be spoken about, and this is the most important, I think I said at the beginning, and it's about trying to convey your skills and achievements rather than talking about just your duties. Now, I think if you all were to get up your CVs now, you could probably highlight areas where you've just outlined your duties as opposed to really going into the skills that you've developed and the achievements you've gained. Now, I don't want to see the duties on your CV saying, this is who I sat next to in this role, this is who I reported to, I made a load of teas and coffees, you know. We don't want to see that. We want to see exactly what you've learned and developed, and what you've achieved throughout your work experience, your education, extracurricular activities as well. So really try to explain how you've developed the skills that you actually say you have, or that you've said you have throughout your CV. And you can do that in many different ways. So I think below we've got, or here we've got a bad example. Now, ABC Marketing, of course, not a real company. But this gives you a good example of a graduate who applied just a couple of weeks to one of our roles, and they had done some kind of marketing assistant job at a marketing company in Leeds. And these are the 4 points, well, 3 points, and I added in the teas and coffees, but shadow and assisted the marketing executives and manager. Well, that's great, but that doesn't, you know, there's no meat on the bone there. I've got nothing to take away from that in terms of you as a person. Second one, sat in on marketing strategy meetings. Well, that's great, but, you know, did you sit in there with your headphones on? You know, what did you learn? What did you develop? Did you have any input? Third point, reported to the marketing manager. You know, these kind of bullet points, even though they might to you explain the experience you had for that company and what you did responsibility wise, they don't actually give us as a hiring manager anything to really understand you by. And of course, you know, making lots of teas and coffee, I think that's a standard for most work experience roles. We don't need to hear about that. You know, if you're a good maker of a brew, that's probably not going to count for too much in this COVID period anyway. So here's a slightly better example. So this is what I would have said had I been that graduate in that role. And I'll read it out for you to save you having to read it off the slide. During my 4 weeks at ABC Marketing, I developed multiple skills through the responsibilities given to me. I had an opportunity to sit in on client calls with the marketing manager and even input at times. This massively developed my understanding of how to manage a client relationship while also improving my confidence and communication skills. So straight away there, you're covering a couple of those bullet points that were on the previous slide, but you're also saying how you have gained further insight into how a client relationship is managed, which is huge, especially for the kind of role that I'd be advertising for, people that have experience of working with clients or candidates. You know, that's going to go a million miles in terms of your application. And then, you know, giving a good example for why your confidence and why your communication skills would improve. You know, a lot of people to jump on a call with a big client as a placement student or someone that's just done something for work experience, you know, that's probably quite nerve-wracking. But if you get enough of those calls under your belt, then when you come into a job after graduating, the chances are you're going to be better equipped to deal with those situations. So again, using as many experiences as you can to try and demonstrate those skills. Another one here. During a creative brainstorm, I gave my input on what the name of a campaign idea should be. The manager decided to use my idea and the event was a huge success. This was a great achievement and has since given me the courage to have confidence in my own ideas. So again, you know, using a real life example of when you've been in that work experience situation to try and relate that back to exactly how your skills have been developed and, you know, what kind of achievements you've had throughout that work experience. So just to quickly recap on those top tips, remember your essentials. So, you know, very basic things, whether that's spelling and grammar, trying not to use those generic terms. You know, we don't want to hear you're a good communicator just as a bullet point. Tell me you're a good communicator in this part where you're actually speaking about your work experience. That's where we want to see if you want to say the generic terms in there, I'd rather see them in actual examples through your work experience, as opposed to a list of top 5 skills that you have at the top of your CV. First impressions again are important, so try to remember to have bits of color in your CV, make sure the layout is structured well, using the bold and italic tools and things like that. If you want to use a headshot, feel free to do that. And definitely remember to keep your CV no longer than 2 A4 sides of paper. Third point, tailor your CV. So remember, whether that's tailoring the design to the different job you're applying for or the content itself, you should ideally be writing a new CV for each different job you're applying for. Now, you'll probably be able to copy and paste a lot of that information, but again, just try to relate it back to the skills needed for whichever job you're applying for. If you're applying for a sales-based job, try to relate your experience in sales. If it's a marketing-based job, do it into marketing. If it's design, into design, you know. So really try to get a feel for the company you're applying for, their culture, their environment, and then tailor your CV to meet those needs. Fourth point was format and layout. So again, I think we've gone through this with the first impressions. They tie in quite nicely together. Just try to figure out what design is going to work best for you, and try to structure the actual segments of your CV so that it reads well. I would actually always recommend putting your work experience above your education. Unless in your education you did something that's very specific and you did maybe a science degree and you're applying for a lab job, then fair enough, put your education above your work experience in that case. But I think for a lot of jobs, it's important to show the actual work experience you've had in similar kind of roles, before you actually put your university and school experience. And then finally, and most importantly, the skills and achievements over duties. So remember, we don't want to hear about you making teas and coffees. We want to hear about what skills you developed while making teas and coffees. No, of course not. But, you know, that's to really get you thinking of what skills you've developed by the experiences you've had, rather than just saying the experiences and responsibilities that you've had. So I hope that all makes sense. And I'd be more than happy to share this PowerPoint with Erica, and she can share it to you guys that are on this webinar. And I mean, if it's being recorded, then feel free to watch that back again.